our commission.
Right.
Yeah.
Ready?
Go ahead. Now you have to go back to pensions.
Can we think of something else to not talk about?
Well, this is a proposal that defies explanation in a 30-second soundbite. And I think that was probably one of the biggest problems with it, in that it addressed a whole series of financial issues in terms of the state's balance sheet and the pensions and whatnot. So it probably would be best if I backed up a little bit and talked about some of the things that happened with respect to pensions and pension contributions prior to the pension security proposal, and then work our way through in terms of what happened. But the state's balance sheet back in the beginning had what was known as a footnoted liability of $4.25 billion, which was basically appeared below the line. So you had assets and liabilities, and then down at the bottom there was an, oh, by the way, you guys owe the pension systems $4.25 billion, which, strange as it sounds, back in those days was a lot of money. And, you know, now we talk about $4.25 billion as the amount of money that the Feds spend in 30 seconds. But anyway, state law required that the systems, in essence, pretend that that money was already deposited into the pension funds. So they had to compute a payment towards that $4.25 billion based on, I believe it was 8.75% over 60 years, and that was the repayment schedule. So that was part of the contribution that the state put into the pension fund every year. The second part of that contribution was the state self-funded post-retirement medical. So that went into the fund. The third piece of it was what was referred to as the normal contribution. Now, the normal contribution would typically be based on the number of potential retirees and the assets of the system and the actuarial retirement dates. How much would you need to deposit into the fund to pay people that retired? So that was the third piece. Now, what the pension funds didn't allow at the time, I don't know whether it was a drafting error in prior law or what happened, but the law actually required a normal contribution every year, whether the funds were fully funded or not. Every private pension plan in the country cannot make a contribution to their system if there's surplus assets in the system. The state didn't enjoy that same privilege.
Not a taxpayer.
Right.
Exactly.
So
It's simple.
that was, again, one of the problems that we noticed. Also at the time, because if you recall, back in those years, there had been a huge run-up in the stock market. Right. And I always give Roland and his folks credit. They, did a tremendous, they did a tremendous job at investing the pension fund assets, and outperformed the market, I believe, every single year.
Yeah, they did.
When I retired, believe it or not, I had the best returns, not I, obviously the markets gave it, of any state pension fund, even though we used no outside managers, we used nothing but civil servants for 10 years.
That's why we brought you back.
Well, so again, you had this situation where, in essence, taxpayers were over-contributing to the pension funds. And frankly, looking back on it, I wonder if we had presented it that way, whether it would have made any difference.
We did not present it well.
No.
We actually did present it that way, and Brian used the phrase intergenerational tax equity, which is, it rolls off your tongue, but the idea was, should the current taxpayers pay for, overfund a system to give people in the future a break? And that was all premised on the idea that the market I guess, keep going the way it was going, but we did try that argument.
We
and-
tried just about everything, but unfortunately, we tried it after we had basically announced what we were doing.
Well, that and
so
the
we
fact that,
didn't-
I mean, as much as I
Prepare
love
people.
Bob Littell, his reaction of calling it wacko 5 minutes after it was presented also didn't help.
But Jim, I thought that the treasurer presented that there was a $750 million hole in the budget and no other way to fill it but this proposal.
I still argue that we did not need the pension security proposal to balance the budget.
Well, I
Yeah.
have to tell you, flat out disagree with you, that Brian Clymer said there was no other way to balance this 98 budget but except by using the pension bond proposal.
I don't know.
But if you
I-
look
I
at
was
if you
not-
looked at the budget, that was not the case, and John Farmer has made that, had that discussion too, that we really didn't have to do it to balance the budget. We could have balanced the budget otherwise, but it certainly helped. I mean, there were
Brian?
ways about it.
Governor Brian Clymer said
I
that we
don't
would
doubt you.
have
I don't
to
doubt
lay
you. I'm just
off
saying that
1,000
he's
state
not-
workers, that we were missing $750 million in revenue. And when asked if there were other alternatives to fill that hole in the budget, he said there were no other ways, methods. I begged him for a one-shot.
Here's my recollection. Because if there was ever a time I thought my job was in danger working for the governor, it was during this time, as chief counsel on point with the legislature, trying to get this thing through. And my recollection is that in December, just prior to Christmas, Brian brought this to the table as a budget solution, described as refinancing your home mortgage
Exactly.
as one of the
Shorter
ways
period
in
of
which it
time,
was.
lower interest rates, shorter period of time, safer.
And I think all of us were happy to hear something that would provide us with some budget relief at that point in time, and so we all went away for Christmas holidays. At any rate, we came back and we had to, we did in fact have we had a bit of a challenge here. We had a hole.
Oh, yeah.
that
No, we did.
existed. Now,
Yeah.
we went forward, we did propose it. We did get undermined, as Jim just referred to, by Senator Littell after providing him with a private briefing with the idea that it would be held confidential. It did not remain confidential for 5 minutes. And that put us back on our heels from a public relations standpoint right out of the gate. We then did include it in the budget. As I remember, the finances were improving, though, during the course of that spring pretty dramatically. And we had gotten almost to the point
true.
where we could have closed the budget. We were within $200 million, again, number in my head. And we think, we're within $200 million, we can figure it out. But then the Abbott decision came down. And that blew another hole in the budget.
250,
And so that number tipped it back in the other direction.
270.
And we were at the point, we were pretty much at the point, I want to say roughly, this is April, May, time for early May, at being able to withdraw it. And then the Abbott decision came, and it just was too much for us to bite off in the next 6 weeks. And so we went to the mat, and frankly, it caused more political damage than any single action taken.
But it was
And
during the
deliberately
first-
misinterpreted. I can't tell you.
I
No.
agreed.
Oh,
Agreed.
absolutely.
I tried to
Absolutely.
talk to the Democrat, they asked me to talk to the Democratic
Caucus?
conference, yeah. They didn't even want me to talk to them. They already had their public relations line. She's borrowing money to balance the budget, period.
Which they're still using, because
Yeah.
in fact, I heard a political commercial for Linda Greenstein
Yeah.
on the way up here today.
Yeah.
And it was
And-
one inaccuracy after
And
another.
I have to tell people that, now, first of all, I said, how much money, where did the money go from the proceeds of the bond offering and the like? And they say, oh, they used to balance the budget. I said, no, not a penny went into that.
No, it was all
It
deposited in
went into the
cash.
pension fund, yeah. And then they say, yeah, but then they invested in stocks, and the stocks went way down. And I said, no, we were selling stocks then. We didn't invest anything in stocks.
Well, as I'm sure Roland will recall better than most folks, within a day or two of actually producing the cash and depositing it into the pension funds is when we had a stock market crash.
Yeah.
Just before the election.
And in fact, I can remember you calling me out of a meeting and saying, you have to have a press conference like now.
We made a good move, phew, we just got it out.
You know, the idea was, well, you know, we had just deposited $2.8 billion into the fund. And, you know, you had to explain to folks that you couldn't quite move $2.8 billion that fast. You know, the money was still sitting in cash. But let's talk about a little bit about what the pension proposal actually did. And one of the things that it did was to allow the state to use the value of excess assets in the pension funds, in the pension assets, to reduce its normal contribution.
And also the municipalities too.
Yeah,
Right.
it gave them,
That would be why you would say it filled a hole in the budget, because you didn't.
Yeah, in essence,
Yeah.
you know, we
Yeah.
didn't have as big a pension normal
Right.
contribution.
Because you
That's big.
because you didn't want to overfund the pension.
That's exactly right.
That's right, but,
It's cost avoidance.
right, that's right.
But in any event, so it, for the first time, it allowed our pension funds to be on the same par as literally every other pension fund in the country. Now, typically, you know, the government doesn't allow a private pension fund to hide profits by depositing them into the pension fund, and that's why they do that. But in essence, you know, it was something that allowed us to reduce the normal contribution. What we also then did was use some of those excess assets to go back to that $4.25 billion in unfunded liabilities, reduce that to 2.75, sell bonds for the 2.75, create the cash, and have a repayment schedule that said, okay, instead of 8 3/4 over 60 years, we're going to finance that 2.8 billion at, well, it ended up being 764, I think, was the total all-in cost, which at that time was a wonderful rate. But over 29 years. So in essence, it was refinancing a mortgage at a shorter repayment schedule and a lower interest rate. Now, again, many of the member employers in the pension funds, the state, the locals, whatever, were permitted to reduce their normal contributions over the next few years. Clearly, we said over and over again, at some point, you're going to have to
Pay
start
back
making
in.
these normal contributions again.
Oh, yeah.
And some made no payments for years, and they got into that habit.
Right. Now,
That was
what,
not living zero.
It was $107 million in reduced payments to counties and municipalities in the first year.
Right.
And you're right, Karen, they got into the habit, and in many ways, the state also got into that habit. And it's, this sort of notion that through the Pension Bond Act and through other steps, that the Whitman administration quit funding the pensions. I mean, the cold reality is, I think, that our pension level was 112%.
at that time, in
And
fact,
2000 when I left.
after not making the normal contribution for several years, if you recall, there was an SCI investigation.
Right.
Not of,
SEC.
not of us,
SEC.
SEC, I'm sorry. Not of anything that we did, but actions that were taken afterwards, that when Christy Whitman left office, the pension funds were still 105% funded. Meaning, if everybody in the pension funds retired tomorrow, there was more than enough money to pay all the pensions.